Hello, I'm Sarah Wilcox, Deputy Director of Scholars at Risk, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the second day of the Scholars at Risk 2020 Global Network Congress. Thank you for joining us. If yesterday's Congress is any indication, we should expect an audience coming from every world region across countless academic disciplines and professional stations, representing higher education institutions, non-governmental organizations, foundations, governments, human rights efforts, and individual champions. Among those champions are scholars who are pushing new academic boundaries in exile, university administrators who provide sanctuary for threatened scholars, students who monitor threats to academic freedom, and activists who campaign for the basic human rights of scholars in prison. It is of and for these champions that Scholars at Risk was formed 20 years ago. While we cannot celebrate that milestone in person just yet, we should take this opportunity to celebrate the network, which is growing stronger by day, and remind ourselves that the collective efforts that you bring to this work are indeed a formidable force. For 20 years, the network has risen above the sweeping tides of war, xenophobia, isolationism, anti-intellectualism, and an increasingly dangerous culture of fear. It's in our most pressing reality today, as a pandemic ravages societies worldwide. We are reminded of our fortune to gather on this platform and to renew our sense of purpose, to think creatively, adjust, evolve, and carry on. Insights from yesterday will carry through in today's panels and plenaries, offering us reflection points on the role of higher education at a time in which we are all asking questions about truth, power, and society. Yesterday, we heard from experts on academic freedom in the Middle East and in Turkey. We reflected on the history of World War II, and we considered how universities can lead us through a crisis like today's pandemic. Today, we will continue to question, and I hope we will find inspiration in a common cause, a collective duty as a global network to seek the truth, promote the truth, and defend the right to question those distorting the truth in challenging times. Now, before we move on to speakers you really signed up to hear from, a few housekeeping points. During each of the panel sessions, audience members are invited to submit questions to our speakers. To submit a question, you'll need to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please note that this is not a chat feature, it's simply a platform to ask questions. The chat feature is not turned on for attendees. We also encourage all of you to contribute to social media and join the conversation there in parallel with these sessions. Share your favorite quotes, ideas, and questions on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and make sure to tag @ScholarsAtRisk. Use the hashtag SAR Congress 2020. The schedule is roughly 4 hours today, all in the same room, so feel free to stay or come in and out as your schedule permits. And for those of you who are unable to attend a particular session, don't worry. We'll be recording the entire Congress, and we will email links so that you can share those with your friends and colleagues. Now, yesterday, Rob Quinn, SAR's Executive Director, mentioned that as much as we're enjoying this new virtual Congress, we know it's not nearly the same as being together with you in person. We soon will be exploring the possibility of rescheduling some in-person elements of the Congress later in the year, and we hope for now you can mark your calendars for the week of November 16th, 2020 in New York City. Now, it's my privilege and an honor to introduce our first session of the day, Academic Freedom Issues in Sub-Saharan Africa, which will take on critical discussions across a region far too diverse and complex to consider in one panel. Issues of equitable access to higher education, the role of universities and scholars in democratic transition, and the nature of student protest are among the many topics up for grabs today. Our moderator for the panel is Satang Nabaneh. Satang is a human rights lawyer, an academic, and an activist. She's from the Gambia, and she's also a citizen of the world, teaching in the law programs of the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. Her research interests include a broad range of issues related to human rights, women's rights, rule of law, democracy, and constitutionalism. She's also the founder and editor of the Law Hub Gambia, a legal resource and knowledge platform on the Gambia. You can find her website at www.lawhubgambia.com. Satang, thank you for being part of the Congress and for leading this session. And I now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you to everyone who's joining us right now. And welcome to everyone in this timely panel titled Academic Freedom Issues in Sub-Saharan Africa. I'll just like to quickly introduce the distinguished panelists before starting the discussion. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Misako, who is a professor of political science at the University of Kisangani in DRC and RSF alumnus in the US. He works as a visiting scholar and later as a postdoctoral scholar at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. He is currently preparing a second PhD in international conflict management at the School of Conflict Management, Peace Building and Development of Kenosha State University in Georgia, US. You're welcome, Fraternel, to the panel. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Siyoum, who has over 10 years of teaching and researching experience. He received his PhD in development studies from the Wageningen University in the Netherlands. His MSc from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and his BA in Education from Devon University, Ethiopia. He currently teaches at Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans, and previously taught at the Catholic University of America in Washington, DC, and Bahir Dar University in Ethiopia. Dr. Siyoum has published multiple journal articles on food security and related areas and has presented at conferences in Europe, Ethiopia, and the US. In addition to his academic experience, he has taken on consultancy roles for government offices and various international NGOs, such as Save the Children International and USAID. You're welcome, Dr. Siyoum. I'll also like to introduce Dr. Noel Twagiramungu, who is a human rights scholar and expert on Rwanda and Burundi. He holds a PhD in international relations from Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, an LLM from Utrecht University, Netherlands, and a BA in linguistics and African literature from the National University of Rwanda. Noel is currently a research fellow at the African Studies Center at Boston University and a postdoctoral fellow at the World Peace Foundation at Tufts University. He has taught at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell, Smith College, and the University of Dar es Salaam, and has held fellowships at Harvard University and the University of Paris. You're welcome, Noel, as well. Hi, yeah, okay. So as I said, I'd like to welcome you all to this very timely panel on academic freedom issues in Sub-Saharan Africa. Given that we do not have a lot of time, but I'm sure we have a broad issues that we want to discuss, very timely issues and interesting issues that really affects quite a number of the country of origin or country of expertise in countries that you have expertise on. I will try to touch on issues that have cross-cutting issues within the Sub-Saharan region, but we'll mostly focus on your country of expertise and origin. And just to kickstart the discussion, I would like to generally ask all the panelists in terms of your personal experience, as well as your professional experience, to share with us what academic freedom issues you have seen in your countries of expertise and or origin, and how, if at all, have you personally experienced these and how they relate to your work, if so, and how. We can start with anybody. Any one of you can kickstart the discussion. I think Noel is on mute.
I can start.
Yes, you can start. Go ahead.
Thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to be here to share my experience. So my name is Aschale Siyoum. I'm from Ethiopia. So what I'll be doing is I'll try to talk briefly about the general academic freedom situation in Ethiopia, especially in relation to the changes that we have seen in Ethiopia since 2018. There is a big political change in Ethiopia, and I'll talk about the extent to which that change have an impact in academic freedom. So to begin with, for me, academic freedom includes more than the freedom of single professors to speak and to write freely. It includes broader roles that academicians play as a leader in a given society. But also it includes the protection students have to pursue their education in a safe environment. So when we talk about academic freedom in Ethiopia, there are a lot of things that we should take into account. But in Ethiopia, especially over the last 10, 20 years, especially professors and students are often the primary target of the government. Especially in Ethiopia, since the ruling party took power in 1991, we have a situation where there was no any freedom of speech. There was no any academic freedom. As you may know, most higher education institutions in Ethiopia are public, meaning that they are controlled by the government through legislations or through resource allocations. Even university officials, university presidents are usually appointed by the government, mainly because of their political loyalty, not simply because of merit, but because to what extent they have that loyalty in terms of their political affiliation. So university policies and priorities are strongly influenced by government policies, by the government. So in that situation, therefore, there is a serious lack of freedom to critique the government or government policies. If you look into the higher education systems in Ethiopia, so what we have in Ethiopia is it's a state control system where there is no institutional autonomy. So institutions are not autonomous in a way that they are controlled by the government. So that's why when in August 2012, when the ex-Prime Minister Meles Zenawi passed away, there was a hope in many people, especially around academia, that there will be a much more freedom, a much more political space in the country. But since the Prime Minister passed away, his deputy, Hailemariam Desalegn, took office, replaced him as a Prime Minister who ruled Ethiopia from 2012 to 2018. But even during those times, there was no any change in terms of administration, in terms of political space in the country. So opposition movements continued, especially after 2012. Opposition movements got stronger, especially young people were unhappy about the continuation of that absence of lack of freedom in the country. So violence continued, especially in the two largest regions in Ethiopia, in Oromia and Amhara region. So that continued violence and resistance forced the leading party to form itself, to reform itself. So that's why in 2018, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took office as a new Prime Minister in March 2018. And since the Prime Minister took office in 2018, he promised a radical reform. And of course, he was able to achieve some of those promises. So for example, he released political prisoners because of pressures in and out of the country, external pressures, but also pressures within the country, the continued resistance, violence, opposition movements by students, by young people in the country. He also made a peace deal with Eritrea. He invited opposition political parties from the diaspora to return back home and engage in an open political space. He also gave permission to private newspapers, magazines to continue their publication. So there were some positive changes that we have seen in Ethiopia in terms of opening up the political space, in terms of opening up the academic freedom as well, because since he took office, he promised a commitment to academic freedom. But at the same time, what we have seen in Ethiopia is an increased nature of ethnic conflict in the country since he took office in 2018. And it seems that the government was unable to contain the situations. And that's why over the last year, his support and popularity has decreased dramatically, especially among the non-Oromo ethnic group. Some people even accused him of favoring the Oromo ethnic group than the other groups in Ethiopia. But the situation is that this rising nature of ethnic conflict have also endangered academic freedom in the country, in a sense that ethnic conflict has disrupted education throughout the country. The government has failed to provide protection to students, to educators in terms of pursuing their education. Even by the government standard, in the fall 2019, more than 35,000 students have displaced from their university education, and they were forced to quit classes, mainly because of this instability, ethnic conflict that we have seen in the country, and the failure on the side of the government to provide that much needed protection for students and educators to operate freely in a free environment. Even one other significant event that happened is 17 female Amhara University students were abducted in Oromia region, and there was no any major effort by the government to find out the whereabouts of those 17 students. It's been more than 6 months since those students were abducted. And all these situations, the rising nature of conflict, the failure by the government to provide that much needed protection, therefore now we have seen is educators are being very critical of the government. But at the same time, we've seen the government responding back by punishing educators, punishing students. So there have been some evidences where educators and students have been targeted by the government in some parts of the country. Even though he promised that commitment to academic freedom, we haven't seen that major difference in terms of practical, concrete steps taken on the ground. So I have a few minutes, so I'll try to finalize it. So what we have seen is that the transition that we have seen in Ethiopia could have been and was an opportunity for the government to open up the political space, to open up the space for academic. It seems that the government is missing that window of opportunity to ensure that there is, and of course, support for academic freedom from the government. Right. So I think let me stop here. And I might return back to some of the points later in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siyoum. And you know, just in terms of just providing us insights into Ethiopia, I see how it also is, in a sense, also connected to the situation of the Gambia. As most of you know, the Gambia was under a dictatorship for over 22 years, and in 2016, 2017, we had a new government come in, and so there is this transition into from an authoritarian regime to a democratic regime. And really it brings to forward discussions around what the potential, in terms of countries that have experienced potential political reform like Ethiopia, like the Gambia, how they can utilize that space, that moment to actually positively impact higher education space, as well as, which really goes to the crux of the right to education. And I believe that we might have some time later on to talk more about some of the issues that have arisen out of the Ethiopian situation. Thank you so much. Noel?
Yeah. Thank you, Rhoda. I'm pleased to join this Global Congress on Truth, Power and Strategy to contribute to debate about the academic issues in Africa. I would like to highlight the problem of militarizing academic life and how sudden change in the language of instructions for political purpose can really undermine academic success and freedom. I know we don't have enough time, but just I would like to just tell you a short anecdote. As you may know, the genocide that befell Rwanda in 1994 claimed more than 1 million of lives, including hundreds of professors and thousands of students, whereas several thousands were forced into exile. In the aftermath of these horrific events, I was one of a few students who returned to the university in the spring of 1995. That historic revival of the academic life, which began in sorrow as we were mourning our parents and colleagues who perished on campus, eventually culminated in joyful graduations, which would be officially celebrated in a highly publicized commencements. So one of these vibrant commencements were presided over by General Paul Kagame, then Vice President, who was also known as the de facto strongman of Rwanda. General Kagame's understanding of the academia and academic expectations were radically new at that time. In his speech, he congratulated the graduates for their accomplishments, but he used his speech to lecture the audience on the radical differences between the academia and the army. His lecture was something like this. Well, just I'm trying to summarize. He said something like this: all you here are very good at using your favorite pens, that pen with which we write. And you are very proud of your pens. But do you remember that sometimes your pens are useless? In fact, this university bears the witness that pens were useless when it came to protecting your professors and your fellow students from the genocide in 1994. And you know what it took to defeat the genocide? Our long pens. By long pens, he was referring to firearms, notably the famous Kalashnikovs, which have become the symbols of the RPF struggle. So, what said President Kagame? I recommend that in addition to your studies, the university programs include also the art of using the long pens. The professors of the art of long pens, like me, will teach you how and why we succeeded where others had failed. So thus spoke the president. Of course, this word was hid because since then, university students have to spend at least a month at military-like training camps locally called as Ingando. But what do the students do at these camps? In the words of one analyst, I quote, students learn to shoot, wear military uniforms, and are subject to a quasi-military discipline. According to Rwandan officials, the lessons taught at Ingando have several goals, including a raising of old beliefs, a raising of political ideologies of previous regimes, reorienting of minds, sensitization, teaching the participants how to be good citizens, to teach citizens how to harmoniously integrate the society, the rehabilitation into society, helping them learn how to lead a normal life again, and to be taught patriotism and the role of the Rwandan Patriotic Front in the past and the future of Rwanda. These goals led some analysts to call those training really re-education or even brainwashing camps. The notion of brainwashing camps is really particularly appealing here for four reasons. I go quick. First, since the RPF came into power in 1994, they suspended the study of history as a subject in schools, claiming that old schools' manuals of history were wrong. Second, the new lessons about the so-called true history of Rwanda that every Rwandan should learn and were taught by not professional historians, but RPF soldiers and political activists who have little, if any, academic training in history. So soldiers have replaced historians, scholars, in teaching highly controversial and sensitive historical trajectories at the heart of the Rwandan crisis. Third, it is now legally forbidden to call into question the RPF versions of history. Doing so amount to denying the genocide or harboring genocidal ideas and ideology. It is in this context that many Rwandan scholars have been harassed, others silenced, others forced into exile, whereas prominent international scholars of Rwanda have been declared persona non grata and denied visa to enter Rwanda. Fourth, and I go quickly.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
That last stroke that broke the camel's back, as we say, took place in 2008 when the government resolved to impose English as the exclusive language of instruction in higher education. To be sure, promoting English in our ever-globalizing world is no bad thing at all. However, doing so overnight for a university which has been teaching and doing research in French for over 15 years is quite a challenge. This is particularly a problem in Rwanda, where at that time, 90% of scholars were French-speaking, some who are in Rwanda before 1904, also other scholars who came from especially Burundi, Congo, and Europe. At a time when just the military in power were overwhelmingly English speaking, because most of them having come from Uganda. The problem here was really that it was very embarrassing for established scholars, professors who have been teaching for 20, 30 years. Now overnight, they were forced to teach in English, a language that they didn't master. So some just were forced into early retirement, others just resigned from their positions. So that's really a problem which undermined academic success in Rwanda, especially because even students who are taught by professors who don't master the language, but also those students don't master that language. So that's really a problem which, one of the problems which undermine academic success and freedom in Rwanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Noel, for, I know the time is quite short, but for giving us a snapshot of academic freedom issues in Rwanda. And now I'd like to invite Fraternel to give us a brief in terms of his experience, both personal and professional, in the DRC.
Thank you so much. About the DRC, I think I have too much to say, but I will try to stay in the limit of time. And myself, as a scholar, I have been working in Congo for many years. I started my career in 2000, but I also studied at the same university as a student, starting in 1989. And just 1 year later, we could assist to what we called the democratization process just as a new opening, because already at the independence of our country in 1960, we experienced a kind of a democracy, because our first regime, the first government, was really democratic. And you know the history of Congo when we talk about Lumumba, who was the prime minister, and Joseph Kasavubu as president. But before, we know during the colonial era, our experience was already bad, because since Leopold II, what was the word? No elite, no trouble. And this has been the strong line that has shaped policies of higher education in Congo. Today, as we have been seeing in Congo, we have now 5 names as president. So it is not easy to try to describe all these trajectories. I will try to summarize, to pick the strong patterns that are shared by all these regimes. And what I will say now is not only as relevant to the current regime, but it reflects a structural problem. How this higher education was organized in Congo, and what are the real problems. But in short words, from independence today, I see the politicization of higher education in DRC. Myself, as a student born under the regime of Mobutu, I knew quickly and very early we were not really prepared to be more free, with open mind, and able to talk about higher education with a big H in capital letter, just because everything was organized in the way to serve local interest, especially the political regime. And you know, we had very bad experience born under the Cold War. You know what was the position in DRC. The regime in Congo was something that could really reflect the situation of Cold War. With Mobutu, 32 years in power, he was able to impose his own will. And I studied my college during that period. We could see students represented by other students, but really as political actors. The professors, the same. The University Management Committee, that we call in French language, Comité de Gestion, they are nominated by the president. You are president as rector. That required a decree of the president. So this is a very particular experience in Central Africa. I would like to emphasize the consequences of this politicization of higher education. As we can see today in Congo, we have many institutions now, but they are created by those who are involved in power. We have public universities and private universities, but in general, they reflect what those political actors want. They reflect the way the country is run. They reflect also how higher education is really prepared to serve a political cause. And we see, for example, for the professors, when you are not elected by your peers, so you don't believe in the notion of accountability. So in Congo, rectors or presidents in American system, they are nominated and they are not really free. And we feel this pressure on the faculty and the staff, even on the students. Professors who have decided to stay, to protect their own dignity, and would like to protect values, they are not really free. We see the consequences only when we check how students are complaining about the fees, exorbitant fees they have to pay. And only we see students talking can demonstrate how they don't accept the system. But this is not the way we could solve the problem, because already the professors themselves are not well served. They are not well paid. And they try, as we can use the language of a tax, they try to send all the burden to students. Students have to pay much, and this doesn't help the system. We have a problem of integrity in the system, but we also have the problem of ethnicity. What we see, as I have to share my own experience, I decided to write a paper with a colleague who is based in Kisangani at my home university, and for that, we were denied our promotion. It took longer before we could be accepted for our promotion as a professor. And my own master's dissertation, master's thesis, was assessed by a politician who decided to write, who was just interested in the status as professor. He took that text and made it as his own dissertation. He presented it and he became a professor. He has the same rank as myself. I denounced this and I couldn't get any solution because the president or rector nominated by the regime that time in 2015 was unable to find solution. Even the Minister of Higher Education, who is a professor, he was unable to solve the problem. So you can see how the system is going down. These cases are part of my own experience. And I have everything is documented. I can provide proof, I can provide anything you need about these issues.
Okay.
So if I have to add something, maybe I will come later, but I would like to emphasize the problem of freedom in Congo, in academic sector. We still feel like the new regime can try to do something. We don't want to be very pessimistic, but the problem is very, very structural. It is not only linked to the current regime, but the problem needs to be solved globally. Okay. That's why we will come later with perspective of solution.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fraternel, and thank you to all the panelists. I know it feels like a marathon that we've gone through all the issues in your various countries, which are very varied but very interesting. And I just have a quick follow-up question, which I'll give you about 2 minutes each to try to answer. I know it's quite short. In terms of opportunities that you see for academic freedom advocacy at the regional level, because with all the issues that you've tried to paint in terms of academic issues, academic freedom issues in your various countries, but overall within the Sub-Saharan continent, in terms of what are opportunities that you see for advocacy at the regional level in terms of pushing for academic freedom. And I'll just give you about 2 minutes each to quickly answer. Thank you. Fraternel, you can start and we can move to the other. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of opportunities, I think I see it in 2 or 3 ways. And the first, in the DRC, I believe there is a way to strengthen ethics, because this is the big issue in Congo. As I have been experiencing that myself, everywhere you go, people have some doubt before they discover who you are and what is your potential. Only the reputation of the country has put many people down. It is not easy to try to push and let people accept you only because of your country, while you should be believed based on what is the reputation of your country. When you are from the US, people can believe in you without any guarantee. They don't have any evidence about yourself. So in Congo, we have that problem, and ethics should be the first point. And this needs policies, new policies to be implemented. We need good governance. This is an issue that can be solved only, can be handled by the government. But also I see a new chance. If we can see what is happening in Rwanda and in many other parts of Africa now, to try to promote the delocalization of some universities from the West. So working on the ground, people can see, can try to imitate, can try to see what is going on in these new institutions, try to see how students behave and how students are treated. Also how faculty is doing its job or their job. And we can see also how the committee is functioning. On that basis, it is possible to see the problem in terms of to promote the crossing fertilization among these groups, and this can reshape the system. Because as a scholar, if I decide to go now to Congo, I don't believe I can do much, only because I don't have enough power. But through institution, that can be possible. But we need to start somewhere.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Fraternel. Dr. Siyoum?
I think if you are raising about the issue of advocacy, I think something that we should take into account is there is space for that kind of advocacy work in Ethiopia, for example. So as I said, Ethiopia is highly a state-controlled system. So unless there is willingness, commitment from the side of the government, as I said, when Prime Minister Abiy came into office, he promised more engagement and commitment to academic freedom, but he didn't follow through his promises. So especially in Ethiopia, in Addis, as the seat of the African Union, at the seat of other international organizations, those organizations can play a big role in pushing the government to have that space for academic freedom. So I think there are ways in which we can promote that kind of advocacy work, but the fact that there is no political space, there is no space for academic freedom, there is no space for participation, the fact that it is a very state-controlled system is a big challenge in Ethiopia still. But there are international organizations, that human rights organizations, who can play such an advocacy work in terms of providing or pushing the limits towards having those academic freedom or generally freedom of speech in Ethiopia. It's not only academicians, it's not only students, but also if you look into the academic freedom in terms of journalists have, in terms of members of opposition political parties are going through. So we have to look into those advocacy workers much on a broader scale than just merely academic freedom as well.
And I just have a quick follow-up question. I know you spoke about the fact that Ethiopia serves as a seat, for instance, of the African Union, and really most of the international organizations, non-governmental organizations, including the UN. And I wanted to sound your thoughts in terms of, do you think that the African Union, the UN, and other international organizations that are situated in Ethiopia, whether that can serve as a possible forum in terms of advocacy for academic freedom?
I think they can play a big role, but as I said, there should be some kind of commitment, openness, willingness from the government as well. Without that commitment on the side of the government, everything is a state-controlled system, and I don't think that there is much effort from those organizations, from the African Union, from those international organizations, given that how heavy-handed the Ethiopian government has been over the last 10, 20 years. I don't think that those international organizations have played a big role, but there is still a room for them to push the Ethiopian government to use their power, their presence in Ethiopia to advocate for that kind of freedom to exist in Ethiopia.
Great, thank you. Noel?
Oh, hi. So there is no question that Rwanda is an authoritarian government with strong control over all aspects of life, including academic life. But at the same time, really the government offers two major opportunities worth taking. One is the development of private universities. We have many universities which actually contributed to educated more people, especially women and young people. So this is really an opportunity with all these mass of people engaged in higher educations. The second opportunity, which also can help those already in private universities and the others, is the development of technology. Really, the government is committed to promoting IT in the country. So this is an opportunity because now with the social media, with internet, which is accessible in many parts of the country, it can be very easy to promote a network among scholars. So this is really an opportunity for international scholars to connect with the Rwandan scholars, those in the diaspora and those actually who are on the ground. They may not have the political space to express their ideas, to share their work, but they can do it using the very technology promoted by the government.
Thank you. Thank you, Noel. I know we're almost to the end of the panel, unfortunately. We have quite a lot of interesting questions that we might not be able to go through totally, but I just wanted to highlight one, and anybody can answer, and also in terms of also connecting it to your final thoughts. The question is whether the persecution of natural scientists is the same as scholars and social scientists in your respective countries. Is it the same? But in terms of your final thoughts going on, I think I wanted you to highlight possibly within a minute or less than 2 minutes, in terms of solidarity building, because I know we had this conversation about the need to have that space for solidarity movement and solidarity building, especially for scholars that are in the diaspora. But also, I mean, we're in a pandemic right now with the coronavirus. I know we're all affected one way or the other, including the Scholar at Risk Congress. And I also wanted to sound your ideas in terms of what do you think, especially within African countries where we have scarce resources, universities closures and all of that, how we can really come up with ideas and ways in which to address these, especially within the kind of environment that we're. So for just in terms of trying to address these questions and your final thoughts, I'll just give you about a minute or less to wrap up. I know it's quite short. Yes, thank you. We can start with anyone. Yeah.
I mean, you've raised a lot of questions. I don't think I will be able to answer all those questions in those time, but to respond to the question, whether it's social science and natural science have been prosecuted equally, I think given the nature of work we social scientists do, I mean, it's our day-to-day work is very much related to government policies, government developmental issues. So if you look into the trend, it seems that, especially in Ethiopia, that social sciences are prosecuted at a much higher rate than natural sciences. It's not because natural sciences are not involved into social issues, into political issues, but our day-to-day activity, our work nature forced us to engage more in politics, to engage more in developmental issues, and that makes us more vulnerable as compared to natural scientists, if I answered that question. But to come to the other issues, I think, of course, solidarity is important in addressing such kinds of issues, but especially in the Ethiopian case, if you see, sometimes even academicians are divided along ethnic lines, divided along political opinions. So it is somehow difficult to form that solidarity, but no one denies about how important the issue of solidarity is in addressing the issue of academic freedom, especially in a country where the state has controlled every in and out in terms of opening up such a political space, opening up such a space for academic freedom. And to touch some few things about the current crisis that we're facing. I mean, African countries are now also experiencing the effect of the COVID-19. So, for example, in Ethiopia, from what I have known, universities are closed. But given all the challenges that we have in Ethiopia, I think we have to raise the issue of about the right to education, as we have mentioned before, the responsibility that government universities have. Now universities are shifting into online education, but we still have issues in terms of access to internet, access to electricity, or even access to personal PC for students who are going back to their cities, their towns, small town, rural towns. So that's the big issue, to what extent that education will continue in such a crisis, and whether the countries are prepared to deal with such impact. And that's, I think, one of the major problems that we have in Ethiopia.
Thank you. Thank you. Fraternel, I'm sorry to say, but I'll give you 30 seconds.
Yes, I see. Thank you. I see many questions here.
Yeah.
I see many questions here. I'd like to respond to answer all of them.
Yes.
It is not possible, but
exactly. Yeah.
I will try to make it very short. One is about if there is still a condition for professors who would like to be as authorities or part of the university committee, to be part of a political party before you can get an appointment. Yes, that's the way it functions now in Congo. And it has been like that for decades. Almost all the political regimes in Congo have used the same device. So that's why people are just used to a kind of allegiance to regime.
Okay.
And that, hello?
Yes. No, yes.
To make it very short, in Congo, we still face that problem. And that's why now we have a new law about national education. In that law, we are supposed to go to elections. Anybody who would like to run a higher education institution should be elected, especially those at top level, as the provost, the president. But this law now, 4 years ago, since it was, we assisted to its promulgation, but we never saw elections in any university in Congo.
Yeah.
They still believe that nomination is the best way to manage critical issues.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Fraternel. Sorry to come in. Yeah, because we at the end of the panel, and I just wanted to get Noel to do his 30 seconds so that we can. I mean, the reality is that this conversation is a conversation starter. So we need to continue this conversation online, offline, within our own spaces, and so forth. And I know the time is quite short, and we apologize. Noel, so if you can just take 30 seconds to wrap up, and we are beyond time.
Thank you. That's my food for thought. I would like just to highlight two areas where really solidarity is needed. One is through grants for joint research. That's really a need to have international scholars working with scholars on the ground in Africa. This helps really to give them, those in Africa, really an opportunity to contribute their knowledge and to express their frustrations and hope. The second one is really I would encourage our network here really to work through international associations. So here I'm a member, for instance, of African Studies Association. I'm a member of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. I'm a member of the East African Association for Political Scientists. Through those organizations, we need to build just a kind of a synergy which can really help put the scholars together so they can have many opportunities to interact, share their knowledge, share their experience. So I think this is the way to go to build a stronger and broader network.
Great, thank you, Noel. And I think that's a very interesting and a vital point to wrap up the panel. As I said, we really apologize that we couldn't deal with all the issues, but as I said, this is a conversation starter that we can continue within our own spaces, as well as in terms of solidarity building. And just to say that, we're at the end of the panel, and we just wanted to extend our deepest appreciation to the very distinguished panelists for an excellent session. I know we needed more time, but this discussion was really vital and useful. And also just wanted to say thank you to everyone that have been watching, and especially those that shared questions with us via the Q&A function in the Zoom. We apologize that we could not get through all the questions during the session, but we invite you, as I said, to continue the conversation among yourselves with us as well. And a quick reminder to be sure to tag Scholars at Risk on Twitter, and also to use the hashtag SAR Congress 2020. The next session, which is going to begin soon, will begin at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time or 4:30 Central European Time. The title for the next session will be The Launch of the Academic Freedom Index. From all of us, thank you, and have the rest of a very interesting Congress.